I woke up one morning to the sound of a steady, rhythmic drip coming from under my kitchen sink. It wasn't the loud gush, it was a quiet, persistent, almost hypnotic drip that had been going on all night. I had ignored it for a few days, hoping it would go away on its own, but it didn't. So I finally opened the cabinet and found a small puddle of water forming around the joint of the cold water supply line. The water was slowly seeping out from where the pipe connected to the shutoff valve, a threaded joint that had probably loosened over time. It wasn't a catastrophic flood, just a persistent leak that was slowly driving me crazy and wasting water. I called a plumber, and he quoted me $120 just to show up, plus an hourly rate of $75. He said he could fix it in about 15 minutes, but the total would be close to $200. I had a choice: pay $200 for a 15-minute fix, or find a way to do it myself. I had no plumbing experience, no pipe wrench, and no clue where to even start. But I had a roll of self-fusing silicone tape, a tube of epoxy putty, and a box of hose clamps I had bought for a different project. I decided to test if any of these common household fixes could actually stop a leak, and if I could save myself a plumber's bill. This is not a sponsored video. I bought these materials from a hardware store with my own money. And honestly, I wish I had tried this years ago. Let me give you some context about why plumbing repairs are so expensive. Plumbers charge high rates because they have years of training, expensive tools, and they carry insurance. The cost of a service call covers their travel time, their expertise, and the liability of working with pressurized water systems. But many common plumbing problems are actually quite simple. A leaky joint is often caused by a worn-out washer, a cracked O-ring, or a loose connection. These can be fixed with basic materials that cost less than $20. The trick is knowing which material works for which type of leak. I had a leak at a threaded joint where the pipe connected to the shutoff valve. The leak was small, about a drop every 2 seconds, but it was enough to wet the cabinet floor and waste water over time. I turned off the water supply and dried the area thoroughly. I then tried 3 different fixes. The first fix I tried was the self-fusing silicone tape. This is a thick, stretchy tape that bonds to itself when wrapped tightly, creating a waterproof seal. I wrapped it around the joint, pulling it tight with each layer. I turned the water back on and waited. For the first 10 minutes, the tape held. But then the water started seeping through the gaps between layers. The tape wasn't able to conform to the irregular shape of the joint, and the pressure was too high for it to maintain a seal. It was a temporary fix at best, not suitable for a permanent repair. Next, I tried a hose clamp, a metal band that you tighten around a pipe to compress a fitting. I placed it over the leaking joint and tightened it firmly with a screwdriver. The leak slowed down significantly, but it didn't stop completely. The clamp was too small to compress the fitting evenly, and it wasn't designed for that specific joint geometry. It worked on a hose connection, but for a threaded joint, it was not effective. Finally, I used a 2-part epoxy putty. This is a pliable, clay-like material that you mix by hand. Once mixed, it hardens into a solid waterproof substance. I cleaned the joint with rubbing alcohol, dried it thoroughly, and then pressed a small ball of the mixed putty around the leak, shaping it to cover the entire joint. I let it cure for an hour. When I turned the water back on, the leak was completely gone. Not a single drop. The epoxy putty formed a solid, waterproof seal that held up under pressure. I tested it for a full day, and the joint remained dry. I had fixed my leak for about $7, the cost of the epoxy putty. I saved $193 compared to the plumber's quote. But I wanted to test these methods on other types of leaks: a cracked PVC pipe, a leaking hose connection, and a pinhole leak in a copper pipe. For the cracked PVC pipe, I used the epoxy putty again. I cleaned the crack, applied the putty, and let it cure. The result was excellent. The crack was sealed, and the pipe held pressure without any issues. For the leaking hose connection, the hose clamp was the perfect solution. I placed it over the fitting, tightened it, and the leak stopped completely. It was simple and effective. For the pinhole leak in a copper pipe, I used the self-fusing tape, but it didn't hold for long. The pressure was too high and the tape couldn't withstand the constant stress. I realized that each method has its place. Epoxy putty is best for small cracks and joint leaks. Hose clamps work well on hose connections and loose fittings. Self-fusing tape is only suitable for low-pressure, temporary fixes. I also tested a fourth method, a pipe repair clamp. This is a metal clamp that wraps around a pipe and compresses a rubber gasket against the leak. It's designed for pinhole leaks in straight sections of pipe. I tested it on a piece of scrap copper pipe, and it worked beautifully, but it costs about $20 and is only useful for straight pipe sections. I also learned some critical safety and preparation steps. Before applying any sealant, you must turn off the water supply and open a faucet to release pressure. Then you must clean and dry the surface thoroughly. Even a tiny drop of water can prevent the epoxy or tape from bonding. I used rubbing alcohol and a clean rag to ensure the surface was spotless. After applying the fix, I always turned the water back on slowly and checked for leaks. I also learned that you should monitor the repair for at least a week. Sometimes a small leak can reappear after a few days. And if the leak is on a main water line or a pipe under high pressure, you should call a professional. The risk of a flood is too high. For small, isolated leaks, these DIY fixes can save you a lot of money and time. Now, let me give you the final numbers. The plumber's quote was about $200 for a simple week fix. The epoxy putty cost me $7. The hose clamp kit cost me $15. The self-fusing tape cost me $10. The pipe repair clamp cost me $20. So for $7 to $20, I fixed a problem that would have cost $200. I saved at least $70 on this single repair and much more compared to a full service call. But there are limitations. Epoxy putty is not flexible, so it should not be used on joints that move or expand. Hose clamps can damage soft pipes if tightened too much. Self-fusing tape is only a temporary stopgap. The pipe repair clamp is great for pinhole leaks, but requires a straight section of pipe. I also learned that the type of pipe matters. Copper, PVC, and PEX all behave differently. Copper is rigid and takes well to epoxy, but you have to be careful about the temperature. PVC can crack if you over-tighten clamps. PEX is flexible and requires special fittings, so these methods are not recommended for PEX. I also compared the durability of each fix over time. After 2 weeks, the epoxy putty on the kitchen sink joint was still perfectly dry. The hose clamp on the garden hose was also holding. The self-fusing tape on the copper pipe had started to weep again after 3 days. So the epoxy and hose clamp were clearly the winners. For someone with no plumbing experience, these fixes are accessible and effective. But you have to be honest with yourself. If the leak is in a wall, under a foundation, or on a pressurized main line, call a plumber. The cost of water damage is far higher than the plumber's fee. Does this DIY pipe repair actually work? Yes, for specific types of leaks, it works very well. The epoxy putty and hose clamps can be highly effective when used correctly. Is it as good as a professional repair? A professional would replace the faulty fitting, which is a permanent solution. The epoxy putty is a long-term repair, but it's not as durable as a new fitting. The hose clamp is a solid fix for loose connections, but it's not a replacement for a properly tightened fitting. Should you try it? If you have a small leak on a non-critical line and you've turned off the water, absolutely give it a try. Just be smart, know your limits, and never hesitate to call a plumber if you're unsure. The most important thing I learned is that many home repairs are not as difficult as they seem. A little research, a few basic tools, and some patience can save you hundreds of dollars, and that's a lesson worth learning. If you enjoyed this experiment and you want to see more real tests like this, you need to commit to this channel right now. Subscribe to Overlooked and hit that notification bell, because I test the hacks that nobody else dares to try, and I show you the truth, whether it works or fails. Trust me, you will not want to miss the next experiment. If you have ever fixed a leaky pipe with a DIY solution, or if you have any other plumbing hacks, let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your experiences, good or bad. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the best plumber is not a professional, it's you, a few tools, and a little bit of confidence. You just have to be willing to try. See you in the next one.